What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today's video comes from a TikTok live stream. Today, we are going to be hearing from Viking, or some guy that's named Viking there on TikTok. He's going to be discussing Christianity, his religion, and the harm that it's caused throughout history. And we're going to be discussing the Hebrew Bible's effect on Christianity. We also delve a little bit into Christian nationalism and what Viking thinks about mixing religion with politics. So if you want to fuck around and find out how Viking deals with the harm that his religion has caused, then please stay tuned. Hey there, Viking. How you doing? And first of all, how old are you?
I am 45.
Awesome. And pronouns?
I guess he, him, but I don't really care what you call me.
Okay. He, him works for everybody here. So do you disagree with the topics up there?
Yeah, so I mean, kind of. I am Christian. I do believe in the Christian God.
Okay.
But I 100% agree with the notion that, Christianity or religion in general has probably caused more pain and suffering and destruction over time than it's caused benefit.
Okay.
And I think that's just part of human nature. Being in the Christian church, I'm terribly embarrassed right now about things going on in U.S. Politics, how they're aligning with things that obviously have absolutely no relation or kind of antithetical to Christ's teaching, which is kind of towards following.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think that's because Christian nationalism has very little to do with actual Christianity, like the theology of Christianity. I'll say it's more about using Christianity in order to push their own political agenda on the wider population. So like they have a particular thing that they want to push on people regardless of whether or not like the Bible actually teaches it or their particular type of theology actually teaches it. They just are looking to use Christianity as like a Trojan horse in order to get these fascistic policies implemented.
Absolutely. So even, and yeah, I don't even consider those people Christian at all. I mean, none of them know anything about Christianity or religion. They just kind of use it as weapons. So I agree with you on there. But I feel like
think that wouldn't you think that anybody that says that they are like, they follow Christ, they believe that Jesus is the Son of God and that believing in him is the way to get to heaven, and obeying God and Jesus is like, the way to live. Don't you think that would describe a Christian?
Yes, but the people who I think are in that category of the Christian nationalists, I don't know. I just don't see that they're actually claiming that. They're just weaponizing the terms and the words, and then zero of their behaviors. I was actually talking more about maybe more middle of the road Christianity that's still supporting nut jobs.
Nut jobs like J.D. Vance and Donald Trump.
Yeah, J.D. Vance, Donald Trump, a lot of the other, Marjorie Taylor Greene and some of these other people who are very antithetical to the Christian faith, which is, love everybody, take care of your neighbors, the immigrant at your door is your friend, just the obligations that Christ gave us over and over and over again, but they do the exact opposite. And so those people are obviously in the wrong, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion. But it's the people more towards the midline who are like, yeah, well, we still have to vote Republican because that's the party of Christianity, when nothing about what it's doing currently is even remotely Christian. So the religious right to me, or the Christian nationalists, are so far from Christianity, but it's the people who still actually go to church, who actually say they have faith, and who think that actions are going to get them into heaven, who support these people who I think I'm having the hardest problem with these days.
Yeah, well, so I would push back on that and say that they just represent a different era of Christian thought. They more or less represent an era of Christian thought that's more akin to like 1920s Christian thought, which was very different than what Christians believe now. So I would agree that as far as modern, more progressive forms of Christianity, they are not part of that group, but I do think that they represent a certain line of Christian thought that did exist in the past and has seen a recent resurgence in it. Because like a lot of the things that like JD Vance and Donald Trump are talking about right now were once supported by the majority of Christians in America, at least. Like this whole idea that they want to switch to family voting, where it's like the man of the house votes, and if you're not married, then you don't get a vote. This was actually commonplace in America up until women's suffrage, and then even later on into history when we did a whole bunch of like civil rights like laws and acts and everything like that in the government that gave women the right to do it. So everything that Donald Trump and JD Vance are preaching has been a line of Christian thought in the past, and how well that aligns with the Bible can vary depending on your theology. But I would say that a lot of the misogyny, a lot of the hateful rhetoric that we see in the Republican Party can be supported by the contents of the Bible. I'm kind of curious, why do you believe in the Christian God personally?
So, I mean, obviously part of it's going to be that I grew up in the church, but the teachings of Christ really resonate with who I am, with my worldview, with my, kind of thoughts on how we should take care of each other, and, kind of the anti-wealth thoughts and beliefs and things that, I don't know, I guess just resonate with my...
Okay. Do you mind if I push back a little bit on this?
Go for it. Absolutely.
Okay. So just get a kind of a sense of how you feel about your own theology here. What do you think about the 10 Commandments? Do you think those apply to Christians now?
I think they should.
They should. Yeah. So you personally would apply the 10 Commandments?
Absolutely.
Okay. So did you know that Exodus 20:17, I can't remember which number commandment this is, God actually lists women amongst property. So it's like a commandment to treat women as property.
Right. So, and that's kind of where my personal struggles come. New Testament theology, actual Christ spoken words, the ideas he got out is what resonates with me. I have the hardest time with the Old Testament. All of that misogyny, all of that patriarchal thought that, I don't know, maybe worked for the primitive man back when there was tribal groups and stuff, or just patriarchy took over. But right. I don't feel Christ says anything about that. I don't think he truly supports that sort of a thing. I don't think the spirit of his message has any.
So do you consider Jesus to be God, like a representation of God, or be part of God, or some kind of...
I believe in the Trinity.
Okay. Well, I mean, if you believe that Jesus is God not the one in the Old Testament that gave the 10 Commandments, as well as all of the misogynistic, all the misogynistic and all of the slavery commandments, as well as commanding the Israelites to take small prepubescent girls as sexual slaves?
So, and again, that's kind of what I'm working on now in my life, or my thought processes. Back then, everything was an oral tradition, right? And so maybe they got a good message at some point from God or whatever, but then it's passed down through generation after generation, diluted, affected by the thoughts, the memories, the personal experience of the people who are experiencing it for hundreds, if not thousands of years, before it's actually written down. And you can't play telephone in one room over a 10-minute period of time and not know that the message at the end is affected. And so by the time the Old Testament's written down, it's passed through countless generations, countless different individuals, and can be affected by that. And I think, from that tradition, it does end up very patriarchal. But I would have a hard time thinking of the way Christ presented religion and faith and his relationship with his father and stuff to be the way that people ended up representing the Old Testament. And so I think all of those rules are rules of man. And if you look at the current Jewish faith and that sort of thing,
right.
They've continued to change those traditions over time. And so even the biblical traditions when Christ was born have changed to the current Jewish faith. Their rabbinical laws keep changing everything. And so it's not a stagnant set of information, I think.
Well, yeah, but for the Jews, at least Rabbi Hannah here on TikTok that I talked to, they acknowledge that God is not all good and is not a good God and is not a good representation of like an ideal way of being. But it kind of seems to me like you've sort of constructed this idealized version of what you yourself should be. And I'm speaking this from a position of like, I feel like I share your sentiment when I was a Christian, because I created this idealized version of Jesus, this idealized version of what I thought like the perfect human being was supposed to be. And so like I constructed that in my mind, and like that was my model for Jesus. And so that was regardless of what's actually in the Bible. And just to tell you what my problem is as far as Christianity goes and understanding the theology, and I think about this in a very engineer kind of way, right? So if we're going to equate Jesus with God, God is the same in the New Testament as he is in the Old Testament and all this other stuff. And if God is the one that gave things like the 10 Commandments that you agree should apply to Christians now, God lists women as part of property. They are property in the Old Testament. And this is even reflected in the New Testament when you get to like, was it First or Second Timothy? I think it might be First Timothy 2:11 through 14. In that, the author, who's claimed to be Paul, says that women should basically sit down, shut the fuck up, and that they shouldn't, teach over men. So it definitely places women in a second-class citizenry kind of system there, and that's from the New Testament, where Jesus is supposed to give this very loving message to love your neighbor and all this other stuff, but it has very clear caveats about what role women play in this society. I do want to give a big thanks to all the people that are sending gifts: Ashland, the Bible guy, as well as Apostate, who sent me a corgi showing its butt off in my face. So I appreciate that, everybody. But I'm going to let you respond to all of that info dump that I just gave you.
Yeah, no problem. Lost the first part of it in my distraction.
Okay. So I'll just recap real quick.
I got it. So, so kind of an idealized version, and maybe that's true. But I look at his words and his message, and I don't know, it works for me.
I get that.
I think, the 10 Commandments were probably pretty closely passed down. That would be one simple thing that says, okay, there's these 10 things. But then so much of the rest of it seems like tradition, like a changing patriarchal tradition that's going to affect the words just like it does today. It's constantly changing.
I'm kind of curious how you parse out between God's commandments and what has been, like, I guess, affected by that hand of man, if you will. Like what has been corrupted by man in there? Because it seems to me like you think that there are some things in the Old Testament that are directly commanded by God, but that it was somehow edited by humans in order to corrupt the message. Am I hitting on that right?
I think any message you give anybody is going to be corrupted by their life experience, their reality, and the way they are going to convey it. I mean, look at the apostles. They all saw things differently. Look at, any tradition, Jewish faith, which, goes back all the way till the beginning of the Old Testament. It's changed over time. It's changed based off of who it was in charge, who the head is. And a lot of those weren't really God's commands. Those were rabbis saying, this is what God wants you to do. This is what, what has been passed on to me. But they aren't all prophets. The people who are making those rules are generally not people who are professing to be directly passing on messages from God. That's just,
Well, so
the book of works. Go ahead.
just to be clear, in the Old Testament with Exodus and the commandments in general, these are supposed to be only passed through one medium, and that's from God to Moses, and then Moses to the Israelite people. So there's only one potential thing right there as far as the story goes. As far as in reality, obviously I have mixed feelings about the creation of the Exodus story and everything like that. I think there are multiple hands, and then later editorial redactionists that went through and pieced together a bunch of stuff. So I mean, that's my view of it, but it kind of seems to me like what you're saying is that the Old Testament doesn't represent exactly what God's commandments are, but you feel like Jesus does accurately represent God's commandments. What do you think about Jesus saying that not a jot or tittle will be removed from the law until it is fulfilled, right? And by it is fulfilled, I feel like what Jesus is talking about is his second coming, when he provides salvation to everybody at Judgment Day, right? So I mean, that's my view of it, but also it kind of seems to me like Jesus definitely supports, like, especially the 10 Commandments, at least as they are written or as they know them in the first century, which would have included listing women as property and treating them as property.
But that's not in the 10 Commandments.
It is. Exodus 20:17. That's the 10 Commandments that everybody references generally as the 10 Commandments, but there were actually 3 different versions. This is the middle version of it.
And remind me of the way they say it.
You shall not covet your neighbor's property, which includes wife, slaves, cattle, donkey, and stuff like that. So you're not supposed to covet your neighbor's property, neighbor being very male-centered, and
Right.
then women listed as, property of men.
Right. Yeah, I can see that.
From a very naturalistic perspective, it makes sense because at the time in the Israelite culture, they treated women as property, and women were seen as property for a long time after that. So on a naturalistic sense, I understand that. But from the sense that, this is God giving these commandments of how to live your life, and how, what Christians now are purporting that the 10 Commandments should be posted up in schools, like elementary schools, high schools. What kind of conversation are we supposed to have with our children in public schools when they have the 10 Commandments listed up there, and amongst the property of men, you have women? What are we supposed to? Yeah, what are we supposed to say to little girls who are in class with boys? It's like, well, you don't have any worth unless you're attached to a man. You're not counted. You're actually counted less than a boy. You're treated differently than a boy. How are we supposed to have that conversation with our daughters in schools? What is that supposed to tell our sons? Yeah.
And I think it's funny because the people who are also posting it don't follow hardly any of the 10 Commandments. And it's like, well, what are you posting that for if you're not following, like the 4th commandment, no one's following that outside of a few religions, which I happen to be part of one. And it's like, well, if you're not going to follow them, why post it? And how about you just focus on following him, and then you'll be the light that people would want to come to instead of.
Well, I think that the 10 Commandments require some nuanced conversation about it, because honor your father and mother, right? That's one of them. I don't think that as a broad generalized statement is always true. I think that there are definitely times when disrespecting your parents is much needed. And this whole honor your father and your mother has actually been used in order to abuse children, both physically, emotionally, psychologically, and sexually. So this entire concept, just as it's put out in the Bible and as it's been preached over the years, is actually very detrimental to the mental health of Americans and, people in general, not just Americans, but people in general.
Right. Right. Because Christianity is kind of a national thing. Yeah.
All right. Well, it was great talking to you. I do have some other guests to get to, and this was a really, really good conversation. I do want to leave off I'm going to let you have the last word, but I do want to leave off by saying that I do appreciate the very progressive form of Christianity you've taken up and the way that you're interpreting your scriptures and everything like that. My issues with the religion and with the theology and the logic, internal logic of Christianity. I don't think that should persuade you away from it, but I do hope that you'll carefully consider your theology a little bit more and become more solid one way or another, and why you believe what you believe. And I get the sense that you would believe in things for good reasons. Like, you ideally want to be a good person and achieve that in the best way possible. That's the feeling that I get from you.
Right. And that is my thought process is, what's going to make me a better person? And, I think I probably pretty blindly followed it up until fairly recently, unfortunately, because of maybe a heightened awareness of terrible things going on in the church and terrible things that they're supporting right now, which is making me really go back and dig into the Old Testament and say, why is it saying all these things I didn't really think about, that maybe I wasn't even taught, at that time. It was just kind of a, follow what Christ is, follow what Christ did, and said, and what have you. And then I go back and I'm like, oh, that's not what he said. Oh, that's not what he did. That's not what I imagined. That's not how I've kind of directed my life. And so, yes, my goal is to be a better person and to have a better impact on people around me, which is why I'm, kind of having this discussion with you, because I like your points. But yeah, I'm struggling. I'm honestly struggling and working through it.
Well,
and who knows how it's going to end up. But at this point, it's definitely a challenge. But I
totally understand that. Right. I'm not gonna say anything, like, I'm not gonna try to refute or say anything about you at this point, but I do want to say that I'm always here for you. So if you ever need to, like, DM me, email me. My email for anybody that's listening is john@godlessengineering.com. You can email me, we can talk or whatever. Yeah, if you have any more, like, theological issues that you want to flesh out or talk about, feel free to contact me in whatever way you can.
Sure. All right, I followed you, and I'll drop in sometimes.
All right. That sounds awesome.
Thanks,
you have an awesome weekend and an awesome day, and I'll talk to you later. Okay.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Well, heathens, that's going to be it for the video today. If you will, please go down below and let me know what you thought about Viking statements here, either on the harm that Christianity has caused or on the mixture of religion and politics. Let me know down below. And while you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of content. And as always, don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.